Please see him. He's a good man and thorough.
Here we go. Interesting conversations with interesting people. That's how we met.
It's a true story.
Very exciting. So, Chess, I'm super glad to have you as a guest on my podcast. And you were kind of there when I came up with the name of this whole thing. And so that's cool. But as it turns out, as I was sharing this all with you, I found out that you actually know the dude, the actual dude. Not the dude. Well, do you know Jeff Bridges?
I do not.
Okay, but you know that
And he
you know
does
the
not know
dude
me.
who the movie was kind of, that character was based off, yeah?
I do.
Okay, well,
Actually,
listen,
I do.
you just tell him I got a rug over here and it really does tie the room together. So, you know, I love
I'm
the
sure he's never heard that.
Yeah, right. But it really does. I mean, that's the thing about a
Oh,
good rug, you know.
yeah.
It's kind of a nice, looks like you're you got a
Mhm.
pretty sweet set yourself over there, eh?
I do. I do. Yeah, you like my pad?
Yeah, very nice. Very nice. Um, so the last time I saw you was down in Santa Barbara, and we were at a pretty cool event down there, and you were just about to um, have your second event in Santa Barbara surrounding your work on a documentary that's about myalgic encephalomyelitis, right? It's called All About Me, and ME stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis. And here, let me fix this.
Well, yeah, I've actually kind of changed
Let
it
me
a
fix
little
this so
bit.
people can actually see how
But
cool, you know, your
what? Oh, really?
background is there. That's cool. So
Yeah, and I can, give a kind of a overview. I mean, it'd be interesting for you to also for viewers to say what all of this is and that you do, I mean, specialize to some degree, or you have a lot of patients and you know a lot about these group of illnesses. I mean,
yeah,
that would be interesting for you to say because people who are watching it that I know too don't know anything about it. So it'd be good for you to mention your expertise if you can.
well, definitely we'll get into that. So like,
Okay.
you know, I think a lot of people don't know what ME is. It's chronic fatigue syndrome, and really, this podcast could be under the envelope of long COVID because, as you know, unfortunately, so many people, like 1 out of 3 Americans in some age groups, are getting long COVID. Um, Even though I know there's long COVID deniers out there, okay, but like it's people are getting it. All right. So and myalgic encephalomyelitis, which used to be chronic fatigue syndrome, or AKA fibromyalgia, is a pretty complex condition where there's chronic pain. There's a neurological component. There's an energy component to it. There's a mood component to it, and so. But there seems to be like a pretty complex web of factors that lead to that diagnosis. And one of the things is long COVID is just like ME light almost. It's like pushing people in that direction. And so many people that have long COVID could end up there. And a lot of people that are not aware of it could end up getting long COVID, and then that's kind of the slippery slope. And not everybody that gets long COVID is going to have ME, but there's just a lot of overlap there. But before we get in, like the purpose isn't necessarily to get into a huge discussion about long COVID. People there's a little bit of long COVID fatigue out there, I know too. But I think what's really interesting about you, Chess, is like how you have dedicated so much of your time and life to advocating for those that have been left out in the cold by the existing medical models out there. So you have the standard model and you have the alternative model, which are the two pervading models in the US. And then you have now a new model emerging, which is biohacking or fending for yourself model. And so they all have extreme merits to them, but they unfortunately all run into this problem with complexity. And I don't know if there's an easy way to say it, but ME is a pretty complex condition, and every case is a little different, even though there's a constellation of findings that lead to the diagnosis. And anyway, so I think it's really cool beyond cool and important what you're doing. And I really wanted people to hear more about it because unfortunately so many people are kind of headed there and don't realize it. And so hopefully that's not true, you know what I mean? But just the statistics would be suggesting that they are. And I just love for people to be able to hear from you a little bit about what your experience was. We could talk a little bit about what the darndest thing doctors say, but also talk about why that is, and not, this isn't like a shit on doctors party or anything like that, but just like maybe to have an honest discussion about where all the medicine and healthcare could improve, and then learn a little bit more about what your project is, where the next event is, and how people can find you if they want to support that. I'm sure we're going to include that in the description of this video, but that's kind of what I had in mind today.
Mm-hmm. That is awesome. Thank you, Dr. Joe. I really appreciate that. And, anything that we talk about, just for people to know, it comes truly from the heart, I think, from both of us, right? We both care intimately about people's health and about people in general. And so really, it's been a long road for me to get to this point. I myself have been sick for 25 years now. So I had a virus when I was 18 years old. I was in college at Emory University, and I was just really excited about what life had to offer. I've always just been very ambitious and driven, and felt like I could do anything in the world. And I think I was just fortunate to be able to grow up that way and have tremendous opportunities from a very young age. And so when I got sick, I just kept pushing through. And I had this inability to heal, to fully heal from infection. And no one knew what was wrong with me. I went from doctor to doctor to doctor. The first one that I went to, of course, was a nurse practitioner that was on our college campus. And when she didn't know what was wrong, I thought to myself, uh-oh, this is not a good sign.
So,
and it has been completely the same story
since then. Can I ask you a question about that real quick? So,
Yeah.
'cause this is such an important thing, and I do want to hear the rest of the story. We definitely need to hear it. Okay, but you were diagnosed with the virus, you had symptoms, and then they missed the diagnosis at that point, or the virus didn't behave the way they expected it to? Like, so what do you mean by they didn't know what was going on?
They just, when I went to the doctors, and well, first I went to the nurse practitioner on my college campus, and it was just in like the basement of one of the buildings. And I just said, there's something wrong. I got sick. I have a virus, and I'm just not able to heal. I would get a cut on my skin and I couldn't heal. I would have wounds and I couldn't heal. And what was wrong with me? And
so the virus before you started getting those symptoms?
Oh, I mean, right away. I had this inability to heal, an inability to get restful sleep. I knew something was wrong. And my brain felt different. My ability to interact with people felt very different. It felt almost like you were out of body in a way. I mean, there were so many perplexing symptoms that, quite frankly, I don't think I'd ever felt until I had this illness come out of nowhere, virtually. And then I went from just doctor to doctor to doctor. And
so what did the second doctor say? Yeah. So the nurse practitioner helped you, I guess. What did they offer in terms of support?
They didn't offer anything. They just said, "Oh, you'll probably get better." And I didn't.
Which is true for a lot of viruses, right? So for like basic, what looks like potentially the thing is we have the benefit of hindsight and knowing that some things really didn't do what was anticipated, right? But back then, do you feel like that first nurse practitioner was out of pocket? Would you have wanted something a little bit more from that person? Just kind of thinking about it, because I mean, realistically, like most viruses will, resolve themselves. And so at what point were you like, okay, this isn't resolving? And do you feel like that nurse practitioner could have offered a little bit more support for you? Like, because the discussion that I'm really interested in is from a client perspective or a patient perspective, where can we as clinicians do better? And then we can talk a little bit more about, well, why aren't we doing better? And what goes into that a little bit. And then, because I think it's a little more complicated on the doctor side too, like why maybe they weren't able to provide what you were needing in that moment, and maybe where that model's falling short just a little bit. And then if we can really have a real discussion about it, maybe we can get people interested in having less people present the way that you did, so that, and then the probability that you go to this place becomes less. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Joe, I want people to learn from what I went through.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I could spend this amount of energy, which is all the energy I have, and I could just fight for myself, right? And I could fight myself for myself with doctor to doctor to doctor, with friends that need to learn about this illness, with, all kinds of people in society, colleagues. I could just fight on my own for myself. But that same amount of energy that I have, I could use to just fight for everyone, because we all need to raise awareness around these group of, like, as you said, complex illnesses that can happen whether you have an infection, it can happen after a trauma. Basically, anytime your immune system is activated and it gets stuck in its highest state of activation and you can't get out of it. And as you've mentioned in the past, you get stuck in these loops. And how do you identify what loop you're stuck in? And how do you talk your immune system off a ledge before it kind of ensnares all these systems in your body into
Yeah.
this pervasive illness? How do you unwind that?
That's
It's
the art
very
of practice.
complicated.
Yeah. That's the
Very
art of
complex.
practice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And no one's better at doing that than you are. It's
Well,
incredibly difficult to do. And so what I would like to say, just from the outset, is that having a clinician that you trust and a clinician that you feel is on your side, that believes you, is incredibly important for a person to be able to overcome their illness. It's not trivial. And because we feel very alone, and we feel alone because we are alone. This is not a disease. I still can't even tell you what illness I have because there's so many different names for it. The first diagnosis I received was fibromyalgia, which means muscle pain, basically. And
after the virus, you had symptoms that
mhm,
persisted. You saw several
mhm,
doctors, and how long did it take for one doctor to say, maybe this is fibromyalgia? Like, how long was that?
a decade.
And how many doctors was that?
50.
Okay, and on the way to, wow, I mean, that's a large number. And so on the
Yeah.
way to fibromyalgia, what were you
Mhm.
being told? Like, so those 50 doctors that saw you, like, what were some of the like most helpful things that you experienced, and what were some things that um, you heard that maybe weren't as useful?
Really, honestly, all people said was, "You're fine." I mean, I heard you're great. Hey, kid, you're doing great. You look great. You're doing great. You are great. I'm like, oh God, that's the worst news is when a doctor is like, hey, you're perfect. I'm like, but I know that I'm not. I know
What were they
there's
basing that
something
on?
very
Just
wrong.
on your presentation, on your labs, on your history, on your exam? Like, h- did they look at you and say, this is fine?
They looked at me physically. Of course, they did a regular physical. They looked at labs, and I went to one doctor who's very well known, very acclaimed. I went into his office, sat down, and he's like put up all the paperwork in front of me and said, "Hey, you're great. Good news." I'm like, "No,
Okay.
but I'm not. I'm not okay. I'm telling you, I'm not okay. There's something very, very wrong here." And you can feel when you have this disease that there's something wrong on a cellular level. It feels like you're being murdered inside your body. And you know that there's no way people with the right labs or the right inclination couldn't track down what this is. I mean, at points I could feel my blood burning in my body. And I thought, there's just no way that people can't identify that there's something wrong with me, but yet they never did. And the only way I received a diagnosis, which I'm very grateful for, it took 10 years of my young life. And I went to a walk-in clinic in Hollywood, an urgent care clinic, and there was a very attentive doctor who was very kind. And I had pain all over my body. And that symptom, as many symptoms, just they can come and go. and it can progress over time. And I did end up getting to the end stage, quote unquote, of this illness, which is a very scary place that I don't want anyone to ever have to get to. And so I walked into the clinic and he said, "Do you have pain here, 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 and here," with a Sharpie?
Yep.
And I said, "Yes, yes, 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 yes." And it was what people call trigger point.
Right.
And so what happened is it started one day on one side of my body, and it just started on the left side and it went all the way down my body, and then it jumped and it went all the way up the right side of my body. And I knew it was progressing. I could tell that there was something happening in me that was progressive. And I was desperate because this pain, it's almost feels like there's an ice pick that's being stabbed in you, but yet there's nothing there. And so I wanted to stop it as soon as I could, but I couldn't find a doctor help me. So I had to live with that pain for quite some time. And finally, when I had the Sharpie diagnosis, it was a huge relief for me. And so he opened the medical textbook and threw it on the chair and said, "You have fibromyalgia." And I couldn't believe it. I could not believe that I was hearing a name for a diagnosis for what I'd had for 10 years. It was so serious that I had not had a diagnosis. That I remember on the trip to one doctor, I was with my parents and in my early 20s, and said to them, like, "If I die and you guys find out what this illness was, can you please just write it on a piece of paper and leave it at my grave?" And they actually just said, "Yeah, we understand why you're saying that.
Yeah.
Like, we get it," because it was that much of an odyssey, and just the level of torture for a person to have something that is life threatening and to not know what it is, to not have a name, just this intangible that you can't put your hand around. And so when I received that name, and then of course the doctor said, "There's nothing you can do," it was still great to have a name.
Yeah.
And that was the first name, by the way, and there have been many since then.
So it's kind of like you finally get a diagnosis and they're like, "There's really no treatment."
Yeah.
So, but there are things that people with fibromyalgia or now ME do receive at the doctor in terms of therapies, right? Like, what's a common treatment that a person might get that has that now? Is it, well, first of all, I know what it is. Well, I don't know. Is this what it is? So there's the idea of like try to make somebody comfortable with pain medication. That's a common one. Of course, there's this huge opioid crisis, right? And then the other one is, depending upon what system. So like if you have sleep disturbance, maybe it's medication for sleep. If it's pain, you might get pain medication or pain for inflammation. But if it's depression, then it's a referral to psychiatry. And this is where this could be like triggering to a lot of people, because basically they're being told that they're, just depressed. Now, there is so much that the brain can do to process and change our relationship with pain, that there are patterns of chronic pain that actually are difficult to unwind without getting into like specific neurological therapies. But that's not the same thing as saying, "Hey, you made this up in your head," which is what a lot of people, I think my experience talking with folks, and certainly the more I've spoken with you over the years, kind of understanding more, because you speak to thousands of people, hundreds and thousands of people that have this condition. And one of the common stories is that they don't feel like they're being taken seriously. They know something's seriously wrong. They see a lot of doctors before they get the diagnosis. And then when they get it, what if I was trying to give the doctor's point of view, what might be seen as is helpful, which is, "Hey, I know you're not feeling very good. Why don't I refer you to psychiatry? And they could put you on some medication like Cymbalta or something that might help you not be depressed and also not have pain because of the neurological and the brain-based aspects of chronic pain." that can be useful. So like, what recommendations were you given in terms of intervention, or does that hit the mark for you at all?
Oh, you hit it right on the head. So, absolutely. So, what happened is I was referred to psychiatry. And unfortunately, I'm an incredibly salient and sane person and very stable. And it actually hurts more. I was like, damn, I really wish I were like a little bit off my rocker or had anxiety or depression or was prone to other things, which, no bias against anyone who has that. But I truly did not. And of course, ever since getting this illness and being treated the way that I have, going to doctors, and just in society in general, you develop a tremendous, well, I speak for myself, amount of depression and anxiety and all kinds of other things. But again, that's because you are in a situation that is like being in a trench in World War One. I mean, you are in a state of survival, not only in terms of your physical state and status, but financially, socially. I mean, it affects every pillar and every foundation of your life you could ever conceive of. There's nothing that is untouched with this illness. There's nothing it does not wreck. It is a wrecking ball. And on top of that, your brain is literally affected by this disease. So it's much like Alzheimer's or MS or anything like that. When your brain is affected, when you're not getting enough oxygen, when your neurons are not in the right way or neurotransmitters are not transmitting properly, when you're not able to have your brain function the way that it is clinically supposed to function, it creates an ecosystem of dysfunction and pain and noises can feel like pain. Light can be pain in your brain. So it creates a depression and anxiety that is literally because there is a biochemical breakdown inside your skull. I mean, I've heard it's akin to people who travel to the top of Mount Everest and their brains become swollen and you can only stay up there for so long. It's not built for the human condition. And so our brains have the ability, as you know, to swell so much that it's like being on the top of Mount Everest. Only we're just lying in our beds or on the floor and at sea level. And so I think that this perception of depression and anxiety and also what's the cause and what's the effect of something is very misinterpreted and very just looked at in a kindergarten fashion. This is not an intellectual highbrow look at how the body actually works and what is the cause and what is the effect, a downstream effect of a truly biochemical illness. And so with that being said, I was immediately referred, of course, to psychiatry. I mean, this lady has pain, we can't see it. It's probably in her head, which it is, by the way. In my brain too. And so I went to a psychiatrist and he prescribed me pretty much right away gabapentin Neurontin.
Right.
And so that drug was the defining line between my life previous and my life now. That was it. That was when I died when I took that drug.
What happened?
Because I could
You coded, literally? You coded?
No, okay, well, let me rephrase. Because I guess, it's very important to be clear because there have been times that have been life-threatening to me. There have been times in my life where I could not eat any food. I could not drink water. There have been times where I mean, I have been on death's door. And so I think it's very important to be clear between a poetic, like I died, and I was actually in a dying state. Because I want people who are listening to this that have not experienced this disease, I want them to understand the severity of it. And so I want to be clear when I use words. And when I say I died, like that was the end of my normal life. My life is a vibrant person, a person who is creative and was giving to the world in that way and had a vibrancy in her I was on a path and that path was broken and was never reinstated. And that was when I took gabapentin.
So what happened?
And It's because the doctor told me to take as many pills as I needed to stop the pain.
Okay.
And so I ended up just taking so many pills every day, and the pain never stopped. But I stopped being able to feel my body. I no longer had the confidence to drive, so I couldn't drive to work. This is a time you have to understand where I was in my most successful state in terms of my career.
Mhm.
I was a professional screenwriter. I was like writing a very exciting movie for a very well-known actor and production company with my best friend. I was working as a visual effects producer. I was developing movies on my own. I was just doing the absolute best that I could do. And I was in my early 20s and I was so
Can we say what
excited.
movie it was? Was
Oh,
it, was
well,
it, can I say it if I'm right?
I don't think you know it.
Were you on
Oh,
what is that called? Hostel 2?
oh, I was a visual, yeah, I worked on visual effects on Hostel 2 and I was working on a, yeah, well, the things we can do to you with visual effects, Dr.
I
Joe.
know, Hostel 2.
Um,
What an interesting movie.
so yeah, yeah, it's fun. And so then, and it was just a great team of people. And then I worked on several movies with this visual effects company where I was a producer. And I hate to talk about myself, by the way.
All right, all right, all right.
I
All right.
hate I
So
hate it.
anyway,
So
so you
anyway,
were at the
blah
peak of your
blah. I worked
career.
in Hollywood, yada yada.
You still do.
Okay,
You're
and
a
like it
big
was
swinging dick producer right
oh
now. You're just swinging
yeah,
around.
yeah, yeah. you know, like I don't fly to the moon, you know what I mean? But like I was enjoying my life and I was on the way up. When you're young, you're like, I'm on the way, I'm on the rise. And it's like
Sure.
everything I was doing was working. And I'd literally wake up in the morning. I've never felt this way before. And I was just excited. Like I've never felt that way. And so this is the time when,
To gabapentin and things changed.
yeah,
Let me look at
gabapentin.
gabapentin real quick.
Yeah. And so I was taking up to like 14 pills a day. And I realized at one point I wasn't hardly eating the food. I was just taking pills. And I would go to
You
try and
Hollywood types,
open.
just popping
Yeah,
pills.
I
Yeah.
know. I wish I were that exciting. Unfortunately, I'm not. And I went to go and open the door to my apartment and I was looking for my keys and I was holding my keys in my hand, but I couldn't feel them. And that's when I started to realize that again, something was very wrong. And ever since then, my brain in many ways has been offline. And that happened again when I was in my early 20s. I'm 43. So taking that one drug, when I use the word death, it's just a phase of life death, not the other types of death that I've, been very close to. But for me, it was critical. It was like going into a very dark forest that I've been in since then. And so when doctors prescribe medication, what they might not understand is that people who do have these diseases, these group of illnesses, whatever we want to call them, are very sensitive. And so it may not be as easy for us to bounce back from a bad prescription as other people.
Yeah, it is a pretty common thing if you have significant chronic inflammation to have a breakdown in the barrier that keeps like food from getting into your blood before it gets digested and absorbed. Like imagine eating something and before your stomach takes care of it and your small intestine absorbs it, it just like goes directly into your blood. Your immune system freaks out. And so like some of that burning pain that you experienced was probably histamine. Of course, we know about mast cell activating syndrome now, and which means that the types of cells that release histamine, when they do and you freak out like that, your body freaks out and you start like feel like your blood is on fire. That's more of a histamine issue. You are getting histamine release, which is activating something called C fibers, which are pain fibers. And so the idea is with the gabapentin, I just looked it up again to make sure I wasn't confusing it with another drug, but gabapentin is what's called a voltage channel blocker. So what it does is it affects calcium, and every neuron has a electrochemical gradient of like sweet spot activity. So Matt, just kind of think about like if you had a sweet spot of like calm and relaxed, and then you had too much caffeine, you get jumpy, or if you had too much alcohol, like people could pinch you and you wouldn't be able to respond. So your brain keeps this like electrochemical gradient kind of at a tight frequency or a tight level, so that you can fire your brain as needed, as life asks you to, in these different systems and networks. And that drug, what it does is it shuts down one aspect of that firing. And so like people that go on that, they can feel numb because they're basically shutting down the network that relays certain types of pain. And but unfortunately also shuts down other networks too. So you can get like dizzy, or you can get memory issues are pretty significant with that, because basically you're turning your brain off. And your brain does all these other tasks for executive function and memory and speech and social cognition. And so like for you, when you are just popping these pills at your discretion based upon the recommendation, which I believe at its core was sincerely aimed at helping you, what happened is it didn't hit the mark in terms of where the pain was coming from. It sounds like because you were numb, but you still hurt, which is really interesting, right? So that means that there's more to pain than just the nerves that transmit the signal. There's so much more to pain. And so that would tell me that, okay, so that particular mechanism didn't hit the mark. And for some people, just like gabapentin like is a lifesaver. Like they can't function without it in terms of their pain. And so, but then the issue again becomes, yes, there's a correct diagnosis. Eventually, they got the medication that's helping treat the condition. But why? Why do they have this condition? And that's a little bit where the models that exist start to fall short. And it's because fibromyalgia or ME, it's a diagnosis of exclusion, kind of. So, or basically, like if you don't have all these other conditions like MS, or you don't have cancer, or you don't have another named condition that has what's called an organic cause that they're aware of, then, or that they can measure with the equipment they have, then they say, if there's no organic cause and you have these symptoms, that means that your systems have lost calibration, which would be a weird way of saying it, but that's essentially what they're saying. And then now you hurt more, and you're tired, and you have these mood issues and sleep issues that go with it. You're tired, you can't sleep, and you're in a tremendous amount of pain everywhere. So it's like the diagnosis of that is like 6 months of symptoms of like two or more symptoms, like either fatigue and or sleep disturbance, mood issues, and pain. So 2 or more of those symptoms for more than 6 months without a known organic cause. So like this is where, and you can jump in if you like, if you have this experience, okay? But when I work with some people that have been diagnosed with this, what I actually identify when I work with them is like, they still have a virus that's really high. It's a chronic virus, but the titers are high, or they have anemia, or they actually have a hypothyroidism. And anemia and hypothyroidism, for example, both of those things could tremendously influence your energy levels and cause fatigue and cause depression. And if your brain is depressed, cause you to hurt more from those central mechanisms. So I do meet people that have organic causes that were either missed in the assessment, or they saw doctors that saw pieces of that puzzle, but they weren't able to put those pieces together to find the organic cause. And the cool thing about the organic cause is if you see anemia, for example, and you go, well, what type of anemia is it? There's over a dozen kinds of anemia out there. Then the game isn't to just go, well, if it's iron deficient anemia, you just got to give iron, because that could be really problematic for people with anemia of chronic disease, for example, which what a lot of people with fibromyalgia have, or I keep saying fibromyalgia, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? So it's like, if I meet somebody who's had ME for 20 years, do they have anemia because, they have been in pain and not eaten and absorbing their food for 20 years and now they have anemia? Or did they have anemia early on? And that was why when they got their virus, or they got their significant like psychological stress or that concussion, is that why they weren't able to recover and get their baseline, like where you were when you were 18.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I just think it's such an interesting thing to kind of go back and forth on. And unfortunately, in a doctor's visit, a traditional doctor's visit, there's just no time for that. And I just had before this recording today, I had a meeting with the nurse practitioner who I hadn't seen in years, and it was really great to catch up with her. And, you know, she was describing how awesome an opportunity to be a primary care physician is and really help people as they enter the healthcare model, but how difficult the Medicare model is in terms of like, it's really difficult. Imagine like whatever you do for your job, right? Imagine whatever your job is. And then somebody came in and said, I need you to do that in 10% of the time.
That's a good way of looking at it.
So like doctors they spend years studying, right? And like lots and lots of time studying. They go through all these different credentialing things to make sure they're legit. And then they sit down and they get into a medical model, and the medical model says, okay, well, we're not paying for that. What we'll pay for is this. And so then all the doctors that are taking insurance, I shouldn't say it that way, all of the doctors that are using insurance, meaning patients are using their insurance, and the insurance is allowing, basically insurance is dictating many times what these doctors will do. And so now they don't even have the time to dig in and do what you and I are describing, which is, well, maybe an open systems assessment to see what the heck is going on. And it's like such a failure, in my opinion, of allowing people that have no training in medicine to determine what people that have training in medicine and interventions will be able to do for somebody. I think it's perverse, and I don't participate. That doesn't mean that my clients can't send their receipts with me to their insurance company, and sometimes they get benefits, sometimes they don't. I often get tagged with this idea that I'm depriving people of their benefits, but it's not what's happening. What's happening is the insurance company is deciding that they don't want to pay for that. And it's the insurance company that is basically saying, we're not going to do that. And they're not doing it because there's no research behind what you do to take care of this thing. For example, there's no research that extra time will help. Well, it's because in research, they identify one or two variables, and then they research that variable, and then they determine what the medical treatment for that variable will be, the drug, the surgery, whatever it is. So imagine you have a condition that's complex, that has it's multivariate.
Mm-hmm. And
what
this is
the heck
very
are we supposed
complex.
to do? So it's like, okay, so we get mad at the doctors that maybe missed the memo. We get mad because like you're just struggling, and you're basically being told you're normal because they can only diagnose and treat diseases. They're not diagnosing and treating diseases of exclusion or inclusion because you haven't had it long enough yet. You know what I mean? So there is like this process, unfortunately, of diagnostic criterion. But then even if you meet the diagnostic criteria, there's not a lot of research out there that can account for so many variables, because it would be impossible to do that study because you don't know what you're actually manipulating to get the outcome. So I think it sucks that so many people are basically going to a model that is, ill-equipped to manage them. And I'm not coming down on medical doctors. If you're an alternative medicine doctor and you're practicing and you're doing great work within your field, like I was trained as a chiropractor, is my second degree. I was trained that the structure will dictate function in the body, and removing subluxation can actually help people by restoring their brain connection to their body, which, there's value to that statement. But like if you have fibromyalgia, and I'm just going to diagnose you with a subluxation, have I actually done a systems assessment to help you identify why you have a failure of energy production? I've maybe identified one variable, and that chiropractic adjustment might be useful in terms of helping you manage pain, which is honorable work. So I'm not saying that, but I'm saying the next level is to understand deeply where the problems are, when they started. And so a case review is super helpful for that. But Chess, when I listened to you talk, I know I just went on this, I don't know if that was that a diatribe? I don't know.
Oh, it's perfect though. I love it.
It's just kind of like, I've been in practice 20 years. So I understand, I can see, brought up in like a chiropractic model of like vitalism, there was this natural competition between chiropractic and like medicine. And so there's this, it's weird that even models compete against one another, which is really bizarre, instead of just like helping people. But as I got into clinical practice, it became clear that it's not really there. Like there's certainly instances where a doctor, and I've had days where I'm not at my tip top, my best in my communication, but I really feel like the models that exist, the alternative model, which is basically looking for a technique to be employed, or the standard model, which is doing a systems assessment but looking for disease process before it intervenes and not really having therapies that account for complexity, really just make it tough. And I freak out when I think about all these people that have gotten COVID, which seems like for a lot of them was like a minor illness. But then it's like they have this minor illness, but then like 6 months later, they're like, man, I am not doing well. What's going on? You know what I mean? And they're basically like you going into the doctor, and the doctor's like, well, wait a little bit longer, wait a little bit longer. And, here, take this to help you with your depression, which again, that's honorable work. It is. And I used to be more like, that sucks. You know what I mean? But it is providing a service. It's ruling out significant disease processes that could kill you in that moment, right? Which is a value. But then what? So that's just like so interesting, going back to gabapentin and how that made you numb, but it didn't actually stop the pain. So like the game then, the goal would be to figure out, well, what are the non-related pain systems that were not influenced by that medication? And that's where you and I need to look in terms of like helping you with that particular type of pain. But I know that you're not exactly where you were then. But before we get into what happened after that, I really want to talk to you about another factor that really, I think it's overlooked. And I think the doctor's job, in my opinion now, I see it as is understanding how to create conditions that are right for the person to heal, rather than only focusing. As a medical doctor, your job is to focus on diagnosis and treatment of disease. I understand that. But another level of that would be to try to understand, are conditions right for this person to heal? And one factor, I wonder, like as somebody who's like, basically you're being told, hey, you're great, you're young, you'll bounce back from this. I don't see anything wrong here. You look great. Don't worry about it. I know you've shared some other stories with me, like, hey, do you have a boyfriend? Just like, go have a good time, live your life.
By the way, for the record, I don't right now. Just
okay,
putting that out there.
Well,
but no, I know what you're saying. Which is
we'll live your life,
and,
you know what I mean? Or do you have a girlfriend? Whatever it is. Like, it's kind of like,
yeah.
But then like, what did your family think when you were going? Like, that's the medical model, but what was your like experience like with your family when they saw you in this, like, basically on the floor, unable to move and unable to eat or really drink anything without experiencing burning flesh? Like, what was it like? What was it like with your family?
I have to say, I think that it was very hard for them. I think it is still very hard for them because they know the person that I am at the core, and they know what this illness has done to me and to my life. I think it's been very hard for them. I think they put on a good face for me. And in doing so, they're always like, oh, you're fine. Just, keep it up, keep everything up, keep going. And, and just kind of being positive about my status. So, and my father's a doctor, my mother was a nurse, my father's also
They're
a
in the
scientist.
medical model that you're seeking out care.
They are.
You
And
feel like they believe you?
Well, the thing is they are their knowledge and their understanding and their experience comes from that model. And so when they send me to the best doctors in the country, and these best doctors trained at the best institutions tell them she's fine. They're like, oh, good. Oh, good. She's great. But because that's any parent's concern, right? You want to make sure your child doesn't have some terrible disease that you know about. I do have a terrible disease. It's just not one that people know about. And so it's not any one family's fault or issue when they don't know immediately or have almost a gut reaction to a diagnosis. It is a societal issue that we have, which is that this is the great albatross around our necks has been the lack of public awareness and understanding with this disease. And so it's almost like a trickle down effect, which is when the public knows and the public understands, and there's this collective sigh when you hear that word. When people hear AIDS, when you hear HIV, when you hear MS or lupus or Lou Gehrig's disease or ALS, or these words have been charged with emotion.
Yeah.
And so all words are charged with emotion. And so any one individual's reaction to this is a part of a collective reaction too. And so my emphasis has not been on how can I continue to educate those around me, because I am always meeting new people. Every day I meet new people, but I cannot every day explain to people what I've been through for 25 years. And of course, likely I've had this even before then. I've always kind of had symptoms. And so how do you explain? And that's the idea of a word. A word can convey so much more than I can in giving you a novel about my life to read. Who has time for that, right? So my emphasis is on how do we elevate the kind of cultural consciousness and understanding of recognition of the absolute severity of this disease group, shall we say. And it is, Joe, and I should call you Dr. Joe.
No, not
Joe.
please.
Joe.
Call me Joe.
Dr. Joe. I cannot express enough about how serious this disease is. But when people hear about it, it sounds very trivial, and it is life-threatening. People die from this. And so they can die from this. And so how do we ingrain in our culture the kind of, again, that compassion, that sympathy, that empathy, that gut reaction when I tell you I have this. The problem is I can't even say this because I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Then later, when I had other symptoms, after taking that drug and having the illness kind of progress, I spent a year in bed and I had to learn to walk again. I would crawl up the stairs. I would sit in the shower and shampoo my hair because I couldn't stand and shampoo at the same time. I couldn't put dishes away or have repetitive movement. It was confounding to me, and the mystery of it weighed so heavily on me because it wasn't just the symptoms; it was the unknowing, the unknown. The great unknown is something that impacts us just as humans. It's looking into the abyss, into a darkness, like what is happening. And so that in of itself adds this kind of torturous element to the journey of a person with this disease. And so what can we do to support a person so they don't have to experience what I did? And so the emphasis now needs to be totally collective, fully collective. And this is something that we can uniquely achieve, but we've got to do it. And we have to do it as soon as possible because, now, as you mentioned, there are people who, after having an acute COVID-19 infection, are, as we suspected, developing the same constellation and set of symptoms as people like myself.
Just like you at 18.
When I had at 18 years old, I had another virus, again, diagnosed with fibromyalgia, then diagnosed chronic fatigue, then diagnosed with myalgic encephalomyelitis, and myalgic encephalomyelitis / chronic fatigue syndrome, MECFS. now I have long COVID symptoms after having COVID-19 3 times. And I had the vaccine too, J&J. I have so many different names for my symptoms, but the bottom line is, are we getting better? And the reality is the incredible influx, this wave of people now. We're talking, Dr. Joe, about tens of millions of people in the United States who are now going to go through my sad story. Like I do not want that. I do not want that. I do not want to see anyone else hurt or suffering with this from anywhere in the world. I don't want one more person to have it. And so it was very difficult because in March of 2020, I was volunteering with the Stanford Genome Technology Center and just helping to get the word out to the media and to public officials that after COVID-19, there would be a subset of people likely developing the same set of symptoms. And of course, without doubt, that did happen. And of course, it looks like is a higher frequency of conversion for this particular virus, which means that people are more likely to develop these set of symptoms after that virus than maybe other viruses like Epstein-Barr, which is about 10% in a study of college students. So this is a public health crisis of the highest degree, but right now it's kind of just simmering on the back burner because, like just what happened with myself and millions of people before COVID-19, it kind of goes into the quote unquote wastebasket diagnosis, and we go into the wastebasket. So that is the term wastebasket diagnosis. And we need to just throw that off the table. And we need to treat this like it is an actual diagnosis. And as you said, there are practical things that can be done clinically to assess a person, to diagnose them early. We know that a person stands the best chance at a full recovery when diagnosed early, right? Because not only are there are things that the person can do, and there are things that they can then get help with. If they know that they should be resting rather than running around or pushing themselves too much, that can help to alleviate symptoms in the very, very, especially early phase. So just getting basic information, even if it's not a pill that we can offer at this time, there are things that can be done, and these people deserve a diagnosis. Most people are undiagnosed. Okay, as we know it, of course, we don't know statistics because no one has done a true epidemiologic study on a community level, right?
Yeah.
We've done it on a national level,
Right.
but we really need a grassroots push to know who has this, how many people have it, what does this really look like, and really get involved. I mean, this is a big push. It's a social push, and we can do it. This is the United States of America, and we can do this. So
yeah,
this is America, and we got to organize ourselves, and we can do it at a community level. And so, that's the idea. And just, I don't want anyone else to hurt. And I know that you don't either. And, but the bottom line, Dr. Joe, is that there's one of you and there are tens of millions of people. And we're going to need help.
Right. We need to get it going, and we need to get a pay structure that works for people. I mean, the thing about your case is you had access to some of the best doctors in the world, and it was still something that was elusive for that long. And so I think that the model itself could benefit from understanding. So there's the acute phase of COVID, then there's the subacute phase, which is like after COVID, before long COVID. And like there's definitely markers before you get COVID. Like if your labs are a certain way before COVID and your exams a certain way before COVID, and I see that, or even before a vaccine, and I see that and I go, okay, we should try to support you this way so that it's not so rough. And we can do labs, and you can do a reevaluation especially if you have a baseline with somebody, you can be like, wow, this is way different, a month after COVID than it was last time I saw you 3 months ago. And this is the area specifically of your brain that isn't working as good, based on your saccade movement, which is a fast eye movement, or your pursuit, or your balance, or this is the part of your immune system that got stuck. Instead of coming back to normal, it got stuck up here. And if it stays there, you're going to get food sensitivities, autoimmunity, mast activation syndrome, or chronic infection, allergy. It could make you more prone to cancer. We can see that like pretty quickly, like within 3 weeks to a month after getting COVID, right? And so you see this stuff and you're like, okay, what I appreciate about you is like you're working on more of a national level and on a societal level, and trying to get awareness, trying to get funding, trying to get training for doctors. You're trying to get facilities to pay attention to this and not dismiss these people. And what I'm over here doing is I'm trying to, on an individual level, being able to deliver information that's specific to them, because what I've learned in practice is that there is no protocol that's going to work. There's no protocol. There is a process of evaluation and understanding systems, the immune system, the cardiovascular system, the neurological aspects of the case, the hormonal aspects of the case, the metabolic aspects of the case, the skeletal aspects of the case. Like within each case, there's a different mosaic of findings that make it specific to them, even though the least common denominator is symptoms. And you can know before you get COVID whether or not, with probability, COVID's going to be more of a problem for you, not necessarily the infection itself, but long COVID as a potential. And you can know within a month after getting COVID in the subacute phase whether or not your labs are coming back to normal. And imagine you're just like not feeling right a month after you had COVID still. And the diagnostic criteria is to wait 6 months to be diagnosed with long COVID, and then be told at 6 months to say, well, you could wait a little bit longer. It's common, I mean, look, you and I did this event. I don't want to say where it was, where we were not the people hosting the event, okay? But we were invited to speak at this event, and like there was all this excitement after the event about like this approach to COVID and long COVID, but all it was like, and it's huge, okay, but it was like, let's make sure that doctors are aware of it, which is like, to me, I'm like, are we still not aware of this? Like, that's the campaign? As doctors need to be aware of it. But the first thing you said to me was how important a diagnosis is, and like that somebody believes you is. And it makes sense, like in the optimum criteria of healthcare, we need to be able to diagnose the basic cause. If it's complex, it becomes more difficult, but then develop faith, confidence, and belief in our patient. And it's like, well, if we don't believe them, how are they going to have any confidence in us at all and our ability to help them, right? So great. Right now, at least that was what, last June maybe, okay, or July, we did this event, and it's like, okay, at least then they were taking it really seriously, that the awareness was such a big deal. But like, we live in a country where we have access to labs that is much easier than a lot of other countries when I work with people that are in other parts of the world. And we can totally assess where you're at before you get a diagnosis. And the thing is like, the medical model will say, okay, so like, let's say your loop of long COVID was you never lost your sinus infection and the cough never went away, you've had phlegm the whole time or bronchitis. Okay, well then that's like loop 1, which is like mucosal lining irritation. Well, why does one person have it in their sinuses? Why does one person have it in their lungs? Why does another person have chronic bladder issues? And that's the lining that's inflamed. Why do some people have more mast cell activation and like food sensitivities? And why are some people getting IBS? And why for some people is it their skin on the outside of their body? It's the mucosal aspect, right? That's one of the loops. Well, there's no protocol for all of those different conditions. So basically right now people are trying to be made to be comfortable to deal with the symptoms, but the underlying issue is the immune system has just gone wacky. And these engines get started by long COVID, and sometimes the smoke does not accumulate in an area where it's enough that it's symptomatic. So these engines start running, there's a problem, your body maybe has a really robust system that can compensate for it, you're not really getting many symptoms, and then all of a sudden a year later, something else happens and your compensation's dried up, and now that slip and fall where you fell and hurt your knee suddenly turns into like scar tissue where you're having multiple procedures.
Mhm.
Okay, and it's just like you can't prevent all this stuff, but there is a way to look at systems to figure out what systems are most involved. We can't call it a disease process when there's a system that's involved, but we can say what can we do to actually untie this knot? And I think it's really cool what you're doing. Chess, how do people find you if they want to get involved and support your movement? Like, we'll definitely put that in the description, but like, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. They can just go to chesleyiinitiative.org, two hard words to spell put together. But yeah, right now what we're looking at doing is working again on a community level for a nationwide impact. Because what you can do is you can start in one county or one state, one area, and create a blueprint, a template for how this can be dealt with. And again, this is just like the illness itself, it's multifactorial, multi-systemic. So we have to look at this from every perspective. So, for instance, how are clinicians dealing with it? And then, by the way, how are the patients treating the clinicians too? So what is the patient clinician interaction like? And really being totally open-minded with what we hear. You know, yes, I'm a patient, but it's so important to step back from that and just look at the totality of the picture, which we know is, you know, patients can be gaslit medically, but at the same time, patients are very frustrated and they can come down on their provider too. They
It's
can be
such an
very
important
difficult.
conversation.
You know, they can, you know, because we're all trying to get to the answer, we might be going at it a different way. But when a patient walks through the door of that doctor's office, they're coming in already with most likely very negative experiences with other doctors. Because again, this is an illness, this is the disease group that is underdiagnosed, that is quite prevalent, and that can be very serious, deleterious, and it can end up in a person's disability or death. So when someone walks in the door, they're not quite sure that doctor even believes them. And so they come in with their guard up. And so what can we do to kind of talk down, you know, the patient or the doctor or both parties to being at a place where they can humbly meet to come to a conclusion to help this person because they're both there for the right reason. So how can we create that as a better model? How do you do that?
Well, I think it's a great question, and it, you know, it's really interesting because it's a tough crowd, man. You know, the chronic patient. A lot of people that come to my office or reach out are pretty angry. Understandably, they have a form of PTSD, you know, from being dismissed and not believed and almost being told they're making shit up. You know, they've had family members that have like disowned them. You know, they've spent their life savings. They're completely broke. Insurance isn't paying for anything. And, you know, by the time they get to my office, they're pretty demoralized. They really often have spent a lot of money with limited results or not lasting results. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not trying to elevate myself here like I was their hero and I fixed all these people. Like, I don't even look at it like I'm fixing people, right? Remember, the goal is to understand, why does this person's body think that this is appropriate, and removing that, you know, more so than just like fixing it. So again, I just want to make sure that I want to communicate to everybody that I'm not trying to elevate myself here, but when I'm just describing what it's like. Okay, so imagine somebody coming in and they've had this for like 25 years, and they have they're upset because like I don't take insurance, so they're already mad at me, even though I don't. The reason I'm not in the insurance model is because I need time to figure stuff out, and some of my interventions they're not treatments for conditions. They're supporting recovery and physiology and helping a person heal, but they're not treating a disease. So like, insurance doesn't want to cover that, right? So it's supporting physiology. It's a completely different paradigm. So they're upset about that. They sometimes, you know, that's a big deal. So and they also worry about, do I care about them? Because they feel like other doctors have, in some types of models, like a functional medicine model, sometimes they spend a lot of money on labs, and they feel like the visits are still kind of quick, and that's all out of pocket, and so they're worried that they're going to end up, even if they do trust me, is it just not going to work? Are they wasting their money? The hardest part is not those things, though. The hardest part is it's a lot of freaking work, okay, to change your lifestyle to heal. And if you're already tired, you're already not sleeping, you already have a support system that's basically non-existent or left you, and you feel abandoned by your family, by your loved ones, you feel isolated and alone, you feel like doctors don't understand you, and the ones that do, you wonder if they even care about you, and you don't even know if you have the energy or the time to do what's necessary. And then like the doctor's like, okay, well, the thing that you do every day that is like weren't aware is contributing to your issue is actually part of it. So like whether it's like a food that you're eating, or maybe an exercise that you're doing, or an activity that you're engaging in. Look, I've definitely seen people who, like, off the wall, like kids or adults that are playing video games too much, how that influences our reward system, and how that influences our brain and our pain control system and all sorts of stuff, our sleep. Okay, porn, okay, how that influences things, right? How exercise, like doing too much good exercise for a person, like overtraining, can just totally crush somebody. How like a restricted diet, which might seem like a good idea, could totally crush somebody. So like somebody could go on a high fiber diet and have something like a condition called SIBO, and that messes their body up way more, even though they're eating healthy food, right? Or they go vegetarian for various reasons, and it's not working out for them because their body doesn't do well with the vegetable. Or they go all meat, or they go keto or whatever it is, and then so the thing that they're trying to do actually isn't working for them, but they don't think that that's the thing. And so imagine your whole life you're talking to doctors and they're trying to convince you that you don't have anything. Okay, and now you're talking to a doctor that believes you and has done a systems assessment, but they're telling you the things that you're doing might not be working for you, and worse, they might be making you worse. So walking into a healthcare model like that, and then like not being sure and having doubts, it's really easy for clients to pull the plug and be like, well, it can't be that. You know what I mean? And then they're on to the next doctor and that next expensive initial assessment in labs. A lot of doctors like to start over. For me, I like to look at what's called a case review, where I feel like all these different clinicians are seeing, they're looking at pieces of the puzzle, and I'm good at puzzles. So I just try to put all the puzzle pieces together, and maybe I add a few edges here and there to make it a complete picture. But it's a tremendous challenge. And then like, if you're a client and you're like, you finally bootstrap it, you're able to like change your diet completely, or you're able to remediate your house of like a toxin or a mold that's actually crushing you and you didn't realize it, right? You're able to do all that stuff, and then you have one really stressful conversation, or maybe you decide to go to a wedding and celebrate and have a little more alcohol than what your brain wants, and then boom, you have a flare. And then you go through this like complete reliving of the entire experience of like, oh my God, I'm never gonna get better and I'm gonna get stuck here forever. And then feeling like you need to start over. But you don't have to start over. We just got you out of it. Now we need to understand what that trigger was, why that particular trigger was happening for you. And the art of this thing is to really create conditions that are right by understanding what lifestyle factors are contributing that you weren't aware of, and then modifying them accordingly. And people that have chronic conditions, part of the dream is like, I'm just going to get back to being a certain way. And of course, you don't want to be that doctor that's like negative, saying that's not possible. Unless you have folks like Joe Dispenza that are like, anything's possible, right? Okay, so you got that whole thing. But then you have doctors that are like being what they feel is realistic, saying no, deal with it. But somewhere in between that is like, well, what can we actually do? And some patients look at a reemergence of their symptoms as failing when it's not failing. It's predictable. Or we can demystify that by understanding what system got the symptom. Like, let's say you got, all of a sudden your bladder symptoms came back when you started doing Pilates. Whereas when you were doing jogging, they were fine, right? Well, what's so different about that? Well, that you can figure that out, right? You just do a history, you do an exam, you figure it out. So it's so hard as a clinician, but like, it's totally worth it. It's totally worth it. It's amazing. It's so cool when you start to untie this knot. But the last thing before I go on is that one of the problems is everybody has what's called an orienting reflex, which means anytime something new enters their brain or their sensory experience, they have to decide, is this going to kill me? Okay? Instantly, there's an instant, okay, and if I know what that is, okay, that's safe, then it gets categorized as generally safe. But our body and our brain is like set up a priori to the unknown. So you walk into a doctor's office, let's say none of these other factors that are causing cognitive dissonance between you and your doctor are there. You trust this person, it's within your budget, you feel really good about the process, you feel like you're able to implement things, or you're open to trying things. But then you go in there and you hear a bunch of new things. And your brain now has to go, I don't know what any of this means. And you can just go into, oh my God, it's worse than it sounded. What does this mean? And then suddenly I'm talking and I sound like the Peanuts teacher, wah, 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 and I'm just going like all excited sharing this information because I think I have a solution. And that person is locked into, I don't know what this is. This is a new thing. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting this doctor was going to tell me I needed to take this supplement or stop gluten or, eliminate foods that were like had lectins in them or, do a brain exercise. And now he's telling me that I have a metabolic overtraining syndrome and that my exercise actually is what's perpetuating the thing that I need to change the most. And it's like their sacred cow has just been slayed. And this new information now that comes along is like, has to be processed through something called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. But most people that have chronic issues already have brain fog and cognitive issues. So the capacity to actually take that new information, process it, understand what it means, and then make it meaningful within that window of time during that session becomes limited. And it becomes another barrier because that anxiety of the unknown, can I even do this? That anxiety can cause a ramping up of stress chemistry that's already ramped up in these people. And it can, again, it's like, sometimes you're like on a, as a clinician, you feel a little bit like you're a male, what are those spiders that have the worst bite? Black widow. You're a male black widow about to be eaten because you want to like disseminate the message perfectly as to inform the person, but not so much that it overwhelms them and triggers this orienting reflex. From a clinician's perspective, that's what's going on. But like from a patient's perspective, I totally get it. I get why people present that way. So what do we do, Chess? From a patient's perspective, how could a doctor broach these things?
Well, that's a really important conversation. This is kind of the first time that I've realized then that I also need more time in a doctor's office. It's not just the doctor that needs more than 15 minutes. It's the patient too, because I do have to process it and think about what you just said. And this is truly one of the most complex disease groups known to man. And it does not fit within that window. It does not, right? And it is, I look at it like a phantom. It's a phantom. And we have to both pull it out. And that phantom can change shapes and colors and sizes. And one day a blueberry can be good for me. And in 2 months, like it could be causing me harm. It changes too. That's what's so tricky, is that it's this like ever changing playing field. It's not just like, okay, you just don't eat gluten, which might be one part of it. but it's like, okay, but do you need carbohydrates so your brain can function? Do you get I mean, it's so complex. I cannot describe the level of thought that one must put into every single nuance of a person's life. And also, granted, it makes us feel responsible, right? When you say this is your lifestyle. So just starting off with
Exactly. I
that this
can't tell
is,
you how
you're
many people
doing
have
this.
accidentally triggered by saying, "Hey, listen, this isn't working for you," and they're like, "You're telling me this is my
Yeah.
fault?" And I'm like,
And it's
"Oh,
not their fault.
I'm saying this awesome thing you're doing. If we could do something else awesome, would
Mhm.
work better. You tried it;
Right.
it's not working out."
Right. It's extremely complicated, right? Because it's not like our lifestyle didn't cause this.
I feel like this
It
is a
can be,
confessional. I should just turn
it
this
can,
way.
I
Like
know.
Chesley, Doctor
Well,
Confessions.
maybe I will. Yeah. No, we need that. That's a good podcast, Doctor Confession.
Yeah.
And patient confessions, but that's interesting, right? Which is the idea that us coming together, we're both trying to do something very quickly that cannot actually be done like that. And it's causing the patient harm because many times, not all the time, but many times, because immediately you're saying their lifestyle contributors to this, which again is not the person's fault. No
It's not
one
their
should
fault,
be
but it
like
makes sense,
this.
right? It makes
It
sense
makes
that what you're
sense.
doing every day is going
Look,
to have the biggest influence, right?
lifestyle affects everything. Okay. Like it's literally called lifestyle. It affects everything. It's not only this illness, but again, with something like this, I mean, I'm sensitive to certain types of tap water. I mean, you can't possibly understand the level and the depth of the complexity of this disease to which everything in life affects you, right? For a long time, I couldn't go to a grocery store. I'm not the only person who said that. It was too overwhelming, the lights and the sounds and the noise for me to handle going to a grocery store. It does not sound like a normal person. So having someone who's uniquely qualified and able to skillfully shepherd someone through this difficult path of life with this disease is very valuable. But even this idea that lifestyle can be a contributing factor is we're quote unquote triggered by that because again, I'm just generalizing because we have been told this is in your head, it's something you're doing, and it sounds very trivial to say, oh, don't eat gluten or don't do this or don't exercise too much. It sounds like we're being brushed off and
Right.
disregarded.
Right.
This disease is so serious. We're like, give me like 50 pills, like this, give me a surgery, give me it is so that the disease group is so serious,
Right.
okay, that it can kill you. That when you say like try and adjust this, it sounds like we're being downplayed. And so
Well, there's worse things than death too. Suffering is
suffering
look,
is pretty bad.
I would be glib if I said I understood, okay, because I haven't.
It's awful.
Okay, but you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
It is a long dark road. And so to have someone like yourself be able to just come with us, we do not want to do this alone.
Yeah.
No one with something this horrible, okay, this dark and this devastating to a person's life should be on that road alone. And so I think this idea, it's the first time I've heard from a doctor the idea that maybe the patient doesn't have enough time to process what's being told to them.
Well,
Again, this isn't just a pill. It's not like that. This is more complicated.
It's true, and it's complicated because if you're a clinician and you're out of pocket, then patients do feel some pressure to try to make it quick. So do doctors. I do have pressure to try to make it as quickly as I can, but I also do my best to create the container that would allow that to happen. But I'm still hustling. You know what I mean?
No, right. Yeah, and I get that. And here's the thing too, Dr. Joe, right? So there are many layers to this, layer cake, right? So you might say to a patient, you might say to a patient, or a client, right? Okay, just try and eat organic food, just as an example. Okay. It's expensive. Is the patient able to work? Are they disabled? Do they have an understanding like a family or partner, or what is their living situation? You're talking about a patient group that it can be so disabled they cannot leave their room, so disabled they cannot work, maybe they cannot even speak. So again, this is just a level that is so serious that and interwoven, right? So, okay, you need to eat healthy in order to get better. You need to have money to eat healthy to get better. You need to be better to get money because you need a job to work full time to get, I mean, the patient is stuck. So when they walk into a doctor's office and they hear, oh, just do this stuff, they try. The complexity again is in the real life situation, which is the person is not fully able to do the things necessary sometimes to get to even that step. So how do we handle that
I see
scenario?
that, and I also see cases where people are like, well, gosh, I don't know if I can afford this. But I don't know. I'll touch base with you. I'm gonna be in Bali for 3 months. I'm gonna head out.
Take me.
I'm gonna go to Europe for about 6 months. So maybe I'll get back to you. If I can afford it.
Because
I'm gonna
because
the
they're
Caribbean
not
for a month and sail, but
right.
Okay. So there's
because
that.
if there were a guarantee, again, these are people who've already like shot so many arrows and so many like basketballs and hit so many balls. They're like, it's this carousel that seems to never end, which is you try, and they get frustrated. But the thing is, Dr. Joe, they haven't maybe been to you before. And so a lot of this has not worked in the past. And I am very grateful to have met you and to have had an opportunity to work with you, because it's given me an insight that there are a lot of things that are under my control. But again, the amount of thought that I personally put into my health every day is tremendous.
Sure.
And just to have the time to do that, not everyone has that time and the luxury to think about it. But whenever I take time off and I'm like, I have to take care of my health, I start thinking about it. I start changing things. But it's a luxury to have time. It's a luxury to have the ability to think like that and the safety and security of a place to stay. Yeah. I mean, I really give my heart to people who suffer with these diseases, this disease group, as we should call it, because I know how much pain is involved in it. And I also am very grateful for all the doctors that want to help, that are on the front line of this, like yourself. Yeah. There are not many of them. They're very rare. And this does need to become ingrained within the medical system that we have, so that I could throw a dart and hit any doctor's office and be like, this person can take care of me, the same standard of care anywhere in the nation. We do not have that yet. I hope that one day we will, but we don't have that right now. And we have tens of millions of people, especially now after COVID-19, who are suffering in this country alone. Yeah. So how do we unwind this? And this is going to take a team of people, and it can either come from the federal government level, where the government institutes this and does what they can, or it can come from a community level. And so I think ultimately it will be the both coming together to create the right standard of care system, to increase education with clinicians and just general public awareness. But at the end of the day, the thing that I'm solely focused on is I just need to make everybody with this have a different image, a different face. I say when they love us, they will help us. And we need to become the most lovable goddamn group of people on the planet. Because right now we're just in the shadows and the corners and the darkness of rooms, and that needs to change.
For sure. And, I have an answer. I think that part of the issue is that we're waiting until something happens before we start treating it. And even then, it's so many complex things. But I feel like there's enough information now. We've connected enough risk factors and exam finding, like Chat GPT and Site. There's different resources. If you're trained, you can really start diving into like in a very, like sometimes I feel like I literally like that Matrix scene where like, oh, I know Kung Fu, like you just plug in and you can get so much information. And like sight is kind of like, I think it's SCITE is something I use quite a bit to look at the literature more. ChatGPT is more of just an overall quick search. But like what you do with that information and how you integrate it becomes the most important thing. But like you got kids that are getting screened for scoliosis and for lice. I mean, why can't we add like some basic assessments, like primitive reflexes and like basic labs to an educational model rather than just look only for cholesterol and blood pressure? You know, like why can't we do some basic, like a CBC with differential is an immune test. It's like $6, you know, you can get it for $6. And it's like, well, okay, what if people just got a CBC with differential and identified some polarization patterns or some weird things in their CBC that don't meet the criteria of a virus or a disease process, but kind of say, wow, this person's really vulnerable to something happening. And then help the person remediate that based on what the literature says could work for that person, or connect them to a clinician within a larger network that does that particular thing. And so instead of having like these different loculated professions within one's like big conglomerate, like, oh, you got a GI person here, you got an allergist here, you got a rheumatologist here, you got a neurologist here, you got, you know, psychiatry over here. Well, yeah, you still want those particular aspects in your facility, but what you want is like, instead of just a primary care sending people off, you want to maintain that integration throughout the whole process and not just be handed off, but you want one person who's kind of the generalist that's overseeing this whole process from the beginning. So if you see deviations from optimal and milestones in a child in development, or you're looking at their labs and you're seeing a deviation from optimal, then you can start to go do these questionnaires that are functional questionnaires and go, wow, this person has a lifestyle issue that looks like a genetic issue that will be diagnosed in 30 years as schizophrenia. Okay, but why don't we deal with it now? You know what I mean? So those genes don't ever activate. And I think that that's possible, but you can't prove prevention. But I work every day with people that have neurological findings and history findings that are consistent with early cognitive decline that no longer exhibit those after working with me. And can I say for sure that I cured them of getting dementia when they never had it? Well, no, I can't say that, but I can say that they no longer exhibit the early findings and they might outlive it, and they no longer exhibit the lab findings. And so the chemistry that has been associated with the condition is no longer on the table. And so again, you can't prove prevention, but you can get darn close. And I feel like we could take that same approach. And so you got all these people that are already diagnosed, and I don't want to say, well, it's too late for them and we should just leave them behind. That's not what I'm saying. But in the grander scheme of a conversation, I do believe that what we just talked about on a grand scale would be extremely difficult to implement and expensive. But why don't we take some of the money that we might use for treating disease that is really expensive and invest it in our future, in the health of our children and the health of our society, rather than only invest it when it's time to treat a condition? That's what I think is possible, especially in the information age. And by the way, AI, say what you will, it's a scary time right now about what could happen with it. But like, we are kind of in this golden era of access to information. And for each person, there is a specific application of that information that could be transformative for their life. And yes, it may be more than a one-step process. The process of recovery might take as long as the process of your development of the disease. Okay, it might be. And again, a lot of doctors don't give timetables like that, or patients won't accept it. They're like, screw this, man. Like, a year is the first phase of care? Come on, man, I need to get better faster than this. At your price, you're gonna say a year? And I'm like, yes, you've been sick for 30 years. You know, we're gonna need to work through some things here. I don't know what exactly is gonna work for you. So I love it, Chess. I love what you're doing. I love that that you haven't let this prohibit you from helping other people. And I think it's a rare person that will actually go through something like that and then make it their life's purpose to make sure nobody else does. So thank you so much for coming on today. I hope this is the first of many. The next one that we do, I think, will be in person. So season 1 is just going to be Zoom, and then hopefully after that we'll have a studio set up and be able to do in person. But before I say goodbye, or we say goodbye, is there anything else that you want to talk about today that you feel like people should hear, or you would like to chime in on that I didn't get to? I mean, I'd be kind of curious to hear what happened after your hands went numb, but that might be a longer story, maybe next time. But like, is there anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I think that the most important thing is that we listen to one another, and that we know we're all individuals, and that to be compassionate and to be open and to be caring. And that's my message. It's a really simple, unsophisticated one, which is just, let's listen to these people and let's help them. Because as you say, the information, the knowledge, the education is there, and we can apply it tomorrow if we wanted to, right? So the pain, in fact, just societally, is that we have tools that can help people today, but those are not being applied. And then, of course, there's the future, which is, okay, let's invest in research. Let's work together as a nation and as a world to combat this, to help everyone, to help hundreds of millions of people, likely hundreds of millions of people.
No, it's
so
pretty scary.
Work together. Yeah. So let's work together, right? So there's the present, there's the now, and there's the future. And of course, we know about the past is quite ugly, but let's take what we have at our fingertips, that are resources and tools and education, and apply them immediately, like absolutely immediately. This should be a full-on rush. And that includes for patients to be able to communicate with their doctors freely, and for doctors to feel like they're not being attacked by patients, to have a good rapport and relationship, as we talked about. And also for doctors to do no harm, which is when a patient walks through the door, believe them, just believe them. It sounds so simple, and it's so unscientific and so unsophisticated. Just believe them and support them and tell them, hey, listen, I'm here. I'm ready to work with you. We're going to get to the bottom of this, and we're going to help you out, because we know the information is there. It just needs to be applied, and people can be helped greatly. And then, of course, as I said, just raising awareness, creating a standard of care, and investing in our future with research. And also, as you mentioned, the preventative notion, and catching people early. I like your idea of children, looking at children. I mean, when I was a child, I already had issues that were developing prior to me having an infection. So it would have been very helpful to have kind of spotted me earlier. And I don't know what could have been done at that time, in the 90s. But again, the pain point for the nation is that there's information that can be applied to people in need. How do we do that? We live in this amazing, blossoming technological renaissance. So if we live in such a world where everything is so connected, what the F is the problem in connecting it? So this is a political, systemic issue that we have. So, so how can we go ahead and just bridge this divide? And this is something that is people working together. It's people coming together from all walks of life, from all different disciplines and all different sectors, and just being like, we have a unified cause. We want to help millions of people. Probably never in our lifetime will we ever have the opportunity to help so many people and change the world. Because, you change one person, you can change the world. You change millions of people, you can really change the world. And who knows the amount of untapped talent that exists in this group of people. I mean, an incredible amount of untapped talent.
People all walks of life. It's so many people right now, especially, like I said, if we talk about long COVID, not everybody long COVID is going to get this, but there's so many, if it's a Venn diagram, there's so many things overlapping. So,
Yeah.
awesome, Chess. Well, we'll definitely have to do this again. I'm looking forward to the next one. And, I'll see you probably in Santa Barbara, our next event, or is your next one going to be in, do you think it's going to be in
LA?
LA?
Yeah, I'm hoping right now, just, off the record, on the record. So I would like to be able to continue our efforts in Santa Barbara County. And I would like to also be able to kind of jump to do a lateral move to nearby counties like LA County, Ventura County, and just start to build this kind of blueprint of how people can work together that can then be replicated. Okay, I do believe if we give people just a clean, easy thing to apply, they can do it. This can be done county by county or state by state. I think that people want to help. Doctors, they're there for a reason. They're there to help and to serve people. Patients are there because they want to be able to live their full lives. And so let's just all get together and make this happen. And it's totally feasible. Yeah.
Marin had you. Marin County, for those of you who don't know, is just north of the Golden Gate Bridge, and Chesley was up here, and Marin County, you lost her, man.
Oh,
maybe you'll be back. You'll be back.
I know. Well, the thing is, you have to find, whenever you do kind of community organizing, you have to find the right community to launch something in. And I do think that where I've landed at the moment, which is Santa Barbara County and LA County, I do think that these provide the fertile ground and the right kind of pre-existing networks where you have people that are ready, willing, and able to work on a cause. And not every community is kind of built with that fabric, but we can figure out what to do here, and then we can apply it other places. But I think that having the right group of people that are really supportive, from patients to people who are philanthropists, to business owners, to people at foundations, and everywhere in between, every single part is necessary. The healthcare systems that are here, the public health department, the county executive's office, everyone has to be a part of the solution. And this has got to be from the bottom up and the top down. And we all got to meet in the middle and make it happen. And that is just very simple. And we've created a very elegant outline as to how to accomplish this. And for me, the most important thing is to revolutionize our image. Because again, this image of us as being, sick and losers and sitting in the dark, and women who just need to pull themselves up, or men who just
call
need
it white
to
woman's disease, right?
Yeah, white woman's disease. I was told by a doctor that only upper class educated white women get this disease, so it's in their heads. That hurts everyone who has it, not only quote unquote white women. I mean, how silly. We don't know the demographics of this disease. We have an idea, but we don't know. And again, we live in this amazing technological age. Let's just use it. Let's use it for all it's worth. And let's get the facts. Let's get the data. And let's have a bi-directional information sharing system where we can pull people in for research, and then that research can give information back to the people on how to improve their lives. And so we have this opportune time, this moment in time that we can take advantage of. And it just happens to also be the time in which there's an influx of people. There's this tidal wave of people. So it's all coming together in this crescendo, but we have to take that step, and we have to take the opportunity and make it happen to help everyone. And I know, Dr. Joe, you're here as a part of that. And I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for me personally, and that you're doing for other people, because I do know how much you care and how incredible it is that you're using your high level of skill and applying it to this patient population that has been so overlooked for so many decades.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Let's go, Chess. We got this. Let's get them.
Okay. All right.
All right.
You're the best.
We'll catch you next time.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Joe.
I just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in. I just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in.